The ground outside the city of Beth-shemesh lay open beneath a sky washed thin by heat. The sun had already risen high enough to drain color from the land, leaving stone and soil in muted tones of pale brown and grey. Fields stretched outward in uneven patches, their boundaries marked by low walls of rock gathered patiently over generations. The air carried the dry scent of grain and earth, heavy and unmoving, pressing down rather than passing through. There was no shade where the land opened, only exposure, and the silence there felt wider than the fields themselves. At the edge of this open ground stood the work of ordinary days. Wooden tools leaned against rough posts. The threshing floor bore fresh marks where wheat had been beaten and turned. The earth there was compacted, smoothed by repeated labor, its surface hardened into a dull, flattened circle. This was not a place of ceremony, it was a place of survival. The rhythm of life here followed the sun and the seasons, not proclamations or spectacle. Men rose early, worked until the heat demanded pause, then returned again when the light softened. Nothing about the place suggested interruption. The people of Beth-shemesh lived by familiarity. Their knowledge was practical, inherited rather than written. They knew how long grain could be stored, how far water must be carried, how many hands were needed to bring in a harvest before it spoiled. Their lives were shaped by proximity to the land, and by repetition so steady it bred confidence. When danger came, it usually arrived with warning, rumor, movement, sound. What could not be seen or anticipated lay beyond their expectations. That morning, attention turned not inward to work, but outward to the road. A sound carried faintly across the fields, not loud enough to command alarm, but distinct enough to draw eyes from the ground. It was the low rumble of wheels moving over uneven earth, accompanied by the restless movement of animals. The cart emerged slowly into view, its wood weathered, its structure simple. It was drawn not by men, but by cattle, their pace steady and unforced. There was something restrained about the scene. The cart did not rush. The animals were not driven by whip or command. They moved as though guided by direction rather than pressure. Upon the cart rested an object known by reputation rather than sight, an object that had been absent long enough to become almost unreal. It was covered, its form indistinct beneath layers of cloth and gold. The presence it carried altered the space around it without sound. The people watched as it approached, standing where they were, their tools forgotten. The land itself seemed to hold still. The cattle moved forward without deviation, straight across ground that offered no path. Their hooves raised dust that hung briefly in the air before settling again. No one stepped forward to meet the cart. No one spoke. Recognition spread quietly, not through announcement but through shared understanding. For months the ark had been spoken of as distant, removed, lost to places beyond control. Its absence had reshaped the unseen boundaries of life. Its return, unaccompanied by force or escort, did not fit expectation. Objects of power were guarded. Sacred things were handled with precision. This came alone, exposed, unprotected by human design. The collective assumption had always been clear. Sacred power was contained by rules. It could be approached if approached correctly. It could be managed through instruction and ritual. Danger lay in enemies, not in the familiar. The idea that the return of something revered could itself become a source of disruption was not held in mind. The cart came to rest beside the field. The cattle stopped without command. The air around the cart felt different, heavier, as though it resisted movement. The men who stood nearby did not rush forward. Their reactions were restrained, cautious. Relief and unease existed side by side, unresolved. The return had not brought clarity. It had brought presence. When the coverings were disturbed and the ark exposed, the moment did not unfold with sound or gesture. It unfolded with consequence. Those who looked upon it directly did not cry out. There was no immediate collapse into disorder. Instead, there was a sudden narrowing of awareness. Bodies reacted before thought could intervene. Strength left limbs. Breath faltered. The land absorbed what followed without protest. The disruption was immediate and irreversible. Men fell where they stood. Others froze in place, unable to reconcile what they had seen with what they believed possible. The work of the day ceased entirely. Tools lay untouched. The threshing floor, moments before defined by purpose, became marked by absence. The social order broke not through chaos, but through isolation. Each person stood alone within the same field, separated by fear that could not be shared aloud. There were no commands that could restore control, no authority that could explain what had occurred. The presence that had returned had not adjusted itself to human expectation. It remained what it was, unmoved by proximity. Silence followed. It did not lift quickly. The air remained still, carrying the weight of what had been witnessed. Those who remained alive did not gather. They withdrew, slowly, carefully, creating distance between themselves and the cart. Relief gave way to dread. The object they had longed to see restored now stood among them as something they could not endure. The immediate consequence was hesitation. No plan replaced the one that had collapsed. The ark could not remain where it was, yet no one wished to approach it again. The community, once defined by shared labor, found itself fractured by fear. The familiar landscape felt altered, no longer neutral. The field itself seemed changed by what had occurred upon it. Messages were sent outward. The burden of decision was transferred away from Beth-shemesh. The people acknowledged without words that what had returned could not be accommodated by ordinary life. The ark was moved again, not with celebration, but with relief that distance might restore safety. In the days that followed, the field returned to its tasks. Grain was gathered again. Tools were lifted. The cycle resumed. Yet the place where the cart had stood did not fully return to anonymity. The ground bore no visible scar, but memory marked it. Those who worked there did so with awareness that had not existed before. Time passed. New seasons came. Those who had witnessed the event aged and died. Others took their place in the fields without knowledge of what had occurred there. The threshing floor remained a threshing floor. The stones did not speak, the earth did not announce what it had held, and yet the wind still crosses that open ground without obstruction. It moves over stone and soil that once bore the weight of presence, uncontained. There are no ruins to examine, no monument to approach, only space remains. And in that space endures the trace of a moment when the boundaries of human control were quietly exposed, leaving behind a permanence not carved in stone, but carried in silence, unchanged by time.